Let me introduce myself to those who don't know me. I'm Jenny Stewart, and I'm currently president of Humanist Victoria. So welcome, everyone. I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion. The title, as you know, is "The Climate is Changing. Why Aren't We?" Before we get started formally, though, I'd like to invite everyone who's on the call to make an acknowledgement of country, wherever you happen to be tuning in from. We are on the land of the Wurundjeri Wurrung and would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that was never ceded, land that has been under their land and waters that have been under their custodianship for millennia. And we seek to walk gently in their footsteps at this stage, and we hope for progress in terms of understanding how things need to change and how we can work together better in the future. This is a Humanist Victoria webinar. So those of you who are not familiar with humanism, I won't go into it in any great detail, but I might put in the chat the Amsterdam Declaration of Humanism, which was revised in 2022, and it sets out the essential tenets of humanism. For humanists, climate change is a very pressing issue, as it is for most people. I mean, we feel that there are many ethical issues involved with this. In particular, the world we are leaving for future generations. And we know that how we protect the environment and so on is critical for our well-being. What else do I need to tell you about? Well, I think at this point, I would like to introduce Keith Burrows, who's our speaker this evening. He may be known to some of you. He's been an activist in this area for a long time. He's also been a physics teacher, and he's taught physics. He's a senior physics teacher. I should give him due credit. He's taught physics, and he's also written textbooks. So he's an educator. He has been considering how to get the message across for many years. He has also got a website, Climate Science for Skeptics. And I'm not quite sure if this is to challenge the skeptics or to attract and reinforce the skeptical approach. So I'm hoping he'll enlighten me about that. And I'll put, if you don't already know the website, I'll put the details of that into the chat as well. So I don't think there's a great deal more I need to say about Keith.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Yes, I was teaching full-time up until around 2006. After that, I've been teaching on and off up until the last couple of years. But looking at physics, I looked more closely at the climate problem after I had retired. And of course, got more and more convinced about the problem. And so I started teaching. So I started talking to teachers and to students about it. And that's how it all started, really. You can see 4 of the organizations I'm sort of associated with around the screen there. But before we get any further, I have to declare some vested interests. Here they are. And that's some of our grandchildren. We've actually got another one that's not there. And I must confess, it's a little bit old, that photo. They were more cute then, but, but they're still there. And this is the point. Climate change is going to affect their lives. And unless we of this generation take much more drastic steps than we have so far, we probably, most of us looking at the audience here, most of us probably won't suffer too many effects of it. But these kids are going to. All the science says that in the next few decades, things are going to get pretty bad unless we take fairly drastic action. Anyway, so let's get on with it. The title of this talk is Why Aren't We Changing, as well as the climate? And I'm going to put up several reasons here, and then I'm going to talk about some of them at least. The first one, and you'll see that this is what I regard as a fairly important one, is we don't understand the science. A lot of people say, oh, the science is clear, et cetera, we've got to act. But they don't actually know much about what the science says. And I want to suggest that there are some things that we should be trying to make people more aware of in that area. Clearly, there are powerful interests who don't want change because it will interfere with their profits. Most of the media are not telling us the full story, or in fact, in the case of the Murdoch media, they're misleading us. I'll get back to that one. I spoke with Jed Kearney a few weeks ago. She was very sympathetic to what I was saying, but she was pointing out that it's so difficult for politicians to actually take action because there are so many forces against them, not just Dutton and that mob, but all sorts of other forces as well. Ordinary people don't want to change their lifestyles, and of course, we don't want to give up our cars, do we? And we don't want to fly everywhere, which is one of the big problems. Education, I'll come back to because that's some particular interest of mine. I think there are a lot of problems in how we can cope with this issue in education. And of course, social media, it's a mess. One of the people in my little current affairs group was getting involved in social media, and as soon as she puts anything about climate being a problem, she gets hammered by all these people who tell her that she's an idiot and all the rest of it. I haven't got involved in all that, but it sounds like it's a total massive confusion out there on that one. So let's have a look at the science for a moment. There's a few years ago, there was an article in the science journals called Scientists Warning to Humanity. The second one, they had already given a warning 25 years before that, signed by over 15,000 scientists from lots of countries. They proclaimed that fundamental changes were urgently needed to avoid the consequences of our present course. But of course, where did this go? It went to all the scientists, but did it get much attention in the media or anywhere else? No. You possibly heard of Jo Gerges. She's a well-known climate scientist in Australia. She wrote an article in the Monthly. That particular one on the screen was from last year, but she's done a more recent one. I think it's published in Quarterly Essay. Yeah. Here it is, Quarterly Essay, Highway to Hell. Well worth a look at if you are interested in looking at this in more detail. And of course, she has said climate disasters are unfolding in the Northern Hemisphere. They're a sign of what's in store here as governments fail to act. Perhaps it's a bit of a pity that the last few years, last 2 or 3 years, we've had pretty mild summers, at least in Victoria. And I think that's meant that a lot of people have thought, oh, well, it's all gone away, I don't need to worry. And perhaps that explains the results of a recent survey by Griffith University that revealed that there's a huge, I put in the word huge here, disconnect between Australians and the scientists over the urgency for climate action. There's repeated and increasingly frustrated calls from Australian climate experts, and the Australian population is just not hearing them. Largely, of course, because the media is not bothering to listen to the scientists. This survey actually showed that between 2021 and 2023, there's been quite a significant fall in the number of people who actually think it's a serious problem. Perhaps that's the weather, perhaps it's the fact that we got an ALP in government in and they're going to solve it all. Well, sadly, they're not. There's science all over the place, and these are just a few. This is just to sort of show you that there are all sorts of science reports out there. But of course, where are they going? They're going to the people who know, but they're not going any further. Government's not interested. And Jenny mentioned my website. Here's a little promo for it. That's it there. It's climate science for skeptics. I started this when I was talking to a number of skeptics, and I mean skeptics as in people who genuinely were not convinced that it was a problem, but were prepared to actually listen. As distinct, I remember talking to one skeptic, and he brought along a friend. The friend was just total denier, just, didn't listen at all. But a genuine skeptic listens to arguments on both sides and makes up his mind. And that's the reason for this title. That's just some of the pages you can look at if you want to. So where is the science? The science is in the scientific literature, the Nature and Science, Nature Climate Change. These journals are full of science, the science of climate, lots of it. And it's all saying the same sort of thing. Glacial melting observed underwater mass outpaces predictions. And that's a very common problem that we're seeing. Things seem to be worse than we actually thought they were. So very briefly, just 4 sections about the climate. Does it change? And could we be affecting it? And what could happen? And what can we do about it? Now, I've got a lot of material on all this, and I have deleted a whole lot of it from this presentation, but you can see more of it in the presentations that you can access on my website or perhaps on Jenny's, I'm not sure. One of the big points that I think is not appreciated by lots and lots of people is that the Earth can change a lot. People think, oh, we had the Ice Age when the Thames River froze or something like that, or there was a medieval warming period. No, they were nothing. The Earth has gone between what we call a hothouse and a snowball Earth a number of times in its history, and these are very, very different states. For example, the last Ice Age, only 20,000 years ago, lots of Europe and North America was covered in ice. Sea levels, because of all that ice that was on the land, sea levels were 100 meters lower. You might say, well, that's not a problem. We've got more land to live on or something. But of course, it's not as simple as that. 50 million years ago was the last time it was a real hothouse Earth, and sea levels were 100 meters higher. 100 meters, that's halfway up Mount Dandenong. Well, not halfway up, but, we'd be well underwater here. So why does it change so much? And, this is just some of the slides that are in my other presentations that I'm skimming or skipping for this one, but I'm picking out a few little important ones, I think. Why does it change? The sun varies a little bit. There are wobbles in the sun's Earth orbit, and of course that changes the amount of heat we get from the sun. The Earth itself, though, there's continental drift, there's different life forms changing the atmosphere. There are volcanoes, massive ones, and of course the one that's most important is the changes to the greenhouse gases. And very briefly, this has been known for over 100 years. It was this guy Tyndall who first discovered carbon dioxide and water trap heat in the atmosphere. Arrhenius worked it all out and decided or figured out that, in fact, this greenhouse effect keeps the Earth warmer by 33 degrees. If it wasn't for the greenhouse effect, the Earth would be a frozen snowball like the moon. So the greenhouse effect is crucial for life on Earth, but it's also dependent on the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this little graph of the last few 100,000 years is temperatures in Antarctica. But the point is that the temperature follows the carbon dioxide very closely. We've increased the carbon dioxide. So the big question, of course, is how much is the temperature going to follow that increase? Any questions on this? Leslie, is it?
Oh, yes. It's not so much a question, and I probably shouldn't say it here, but as a feminist as well, the first person, I really regret opening my mouth. The first person to do any experiments on the greenhouse effect was a woman called Eunice Foote.
Yep.
Look her, and if you haven't heard of her, maybe you'd like to investigate. 1856. She did do, I think she published stuff anyhow. So
I'm sorry, that's one of the slides that I left out of this presentation. It's actually the first one on my historical one, but I just picked up a couple of them. But yes, Eunice Foote was very significant in this.
I do like to stand up for Eunice, so I'm sorry, everyone.
Thank
you. Thank you.
If you look at my full presentation, you'll see a picture of her. And
I did say I shouldn't have opened my mouth because I did I did feel that it was an unnecessary comment, but I just love her.
Obviously, the next question is could we be affecting it? Well, of course we are. We know why we're affecting it. We invented steam engines and diesel engines and coal-fired power stations and all the rest. And the consequence of that has been that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone from a little bit less than 200 back in the 1950s or so, and in May this year it reached a peak of 427 parts a million. And the problem, of course, it's still increasing. And not surprisingly, the temperature has followed that. The temperature goes up and down for various reasons, but you can see the red lines and the orange lines are going up pretty much in line with the blue lines, which are the carbon dioxide measurements. Last year was the hottest year ever, and at the rate we're going this year, it could well be that 2024 will be even hotter, but we'll have to wait and see another few months. But the trend at the moment, as you can see there, it's not going to take long to reach that 1.5 degrees. And to imagine we can turn that around, that trend around, well, we've got to try and do it, but it's going to be very, very hard. And so far, we're not doing much about it. And so far, look at the sea surface temperature from last year. Oh, you can't see my cursor, but anyway, look at the red line along there. That was last year's sea surface temperatures, and so far this year, I think actually it's come down to around about what it was last year now, but up until now, it's been setting yet more records. And of course, the sea surface temperature is really crucial to much of life on Earth, and particularly to things like the Great Barrier Reef. Where's it all coming from? Well, to cut a long story short, electricity generation, direct use of gas in our houses, of course, transport, and various other things. The only bit of good news is that since 2005, land use and land use clearing and forestry has decreased. The amount of carbon dioxide's decreased, but that's really the only significant decrease we've had. And when we look at the world picture, now here Australia is more than anyone else per person. It does depend on how you do the figures, and there are other graphs where we're not quite as bad as America or Russia or whatever, but whatever it is, we're right up the top there in terms of energy use per person, which is very sad. And as I've said in the middle there, China's about half us, but a lot of China's emissions are because they make all the stuff we buy, then throw away, of course, which is another story. So this is just a quick picture of our emissions. They really are going pretty steadily. The dip at the right-hand end is mainly due to what happened in COVID. And unfortunately, that particular graph doesn't include after COVID. But if we do look at that graph there, you can see that, okay, it dipped a bit to COVID, but then it's been pretty steady. The other thing to remember, it's not just carbon dioxide, it's methane and other gases like that. One of the big problems is our household gas. It doesn't often escapes, and it's actually a lot more potent per gram than carbon dioxide. And in fact, the carbon dioxide greenhouse effect is about 65%, the methane's around about 20%. So we have to watch both of those. And one of the problems is that as we warm the polar parts of the Earth, all that frozen methane in the ground, that's permafrost, that's starting to melt and releasing methane. And in fact, there's some methane being released in, sorry, that's the Arctic, never mind. So what could happen, and does it matter? Let's quickly have a look at that. Two ways to answer. We can use our understanding of the physics, that we often call it computer modeling. Basically, it's just putting the physics together. Or we can look at what's happened in the past. And this is a very brief bit. So the predictions, to cut a long story short, and it is quite a long story, and you can see more of it if you look at the climate science presentations on the website. Basically, the predictions we make with the physics are pretty accurate. You can see all those various wiggly lines. Some are predictions and some are what's happened, and they're pretty much the same. So we can rely fairly much on the predictions of the models. The other thing about this is, of course, as the climate warms, higher temperatures mean that water gets warmer, and more water and carbon dioxide, more water vapor and carbon dioxide come out of the water and increase the greenhouse warming. And so we get still higher temperatures. It's a sort of positive feedback there. That's one of the reasons that once you start warming the Earth, there's a sort of certain trend for going, whatever you do. The other way of looking at what might happen is to look back in the past and see what's happened before when carbon dioxide's been this high. Because, as I hinted earlier, things in the past have changed a whole lot. Now, I think this is a really important notion, and it's something hopefully we can take away from here and sort of help our friends perhaps realize that we're not talking about, the little ice age or whatever we want to call it, and the medieval warming period. We're talking about totally different climates. Over 500 million years, it's gone up and down. Over the last 1 million years, it's gone up and down between more or less what we're at now, which is 20th century temperature, the middle green line, and a snowball Earth. But then when we expand out just the last 20,000 years, human civilization developed in that period. And, well, about the last 10,000 years, we've had a pretty stable climate. But already we've made that +1 degree jump at the end. You can see it's a very significant jump compared to the last 10,000 years over which humanity's evolved. But of course, what we're looking at now is not 1 degree. It's more like 2 degrees. If we look back at periods when that's been the temperature, well, the little ice, sorry, the last interglacial, that's what LIG means. The last interglacial, carbon dioxide was quite a lot less than it is now, but it was 1 degree warmer and sea levels were about 8 meters higher. But when it was about 400 parts per million, sea levels were something like 30 meters higher. Now, that puts us in Fairfield under the water, I think, or at the seashore, perhaps. So this is what we're looking at happening if we go up to 2 and 3 degrees. Okay, it's not going to happen in the next few years. It's going to happen in, well, that's the big question. What will happen by the end of this century? Some people say it might have a sea level rise of about 0.5 metre. Others say it could be up to 3 metres. We don't really know, but one way of having a look at what can happen, at the last warm period, people have looked at, places like that picture there where they can see layers of what's been going on. And the findings show that at one point the sea level rose around about 3 metres within 50 to 100 years. And don't forget, that was not with 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide. It was only with something less than 300. So that's the sort of thing that might happen. Well, okay, so what would that look like here? You know where that is. That's not going to be very nice. Not going to be very nice to be in Melbourne with a 10-metre sea level rise. That's just reinforcing that. Sea level rise is an interesting thing. So far, it's been going up steadily, not at a huge rate, but there's a problem. What we've seen so far, water expands as the temperature goes up, and that red line perhaps illustrates it. But the other component of sea level rise, of course, is melting ice. And what happens there is we get this sort of feedback effect. So, okay, rises slowly at first, but then once it's melting a lot, it starts to melt faster and faster, because the more it melts, the more the more that melts, the greater the amount of water that's absorbing the sunlight and getting warm and so on. Now, I think because of the time, I'm going to skip our little excursion to Greenland. We went to Greenland to have a look at this firsthand, and there's all the ice flowing out to sea. As you can see there, between 1900 and 2000, it took 100 years for the melting, the calving face to go back that far, but it only took another 10 years to go back about the same amount. And at least in 2018, it was way back there, and it's getting faster and faster. If you go to Greenland and talk to some of the people there, as we did, we had a very good guide, they can see it happening. And of course, it's not just a case of it's melting. When it melts, it trickles down through the ice, it goes under the ice, and that's what enables the ice to just fall off the land. Okay. All right. I told you before that things seem to be happening faster than a lot of us thought they would. The Arctic summer ice, for example, has almost halved in the last 20 years or so. And of course, when it melts, the ice reflects the sun, the water absorbs the sun, makes it warmer, and as we saw before, it's another one of those positive feedbacks. The more the ice melts, the warmer the water gets. And of course, at the other end of the Earth, we're having the same sort of thing. The Antarctic is melting all around the place. I haven't got time to go into the details, but basically, scientists are worried that we're actually reaching the point of no return. It's not just that it will stop melting, but we won't be able to stop it melting. It's irreversible. This is the problem. Forecasts of sea level rise range from 80, you can see there, from 85 centimetres up, and a lot of people think it could well be more than that. And of course, this is the problem. We can say, oh, well, okay, we'll just sort of move back from the beach a little bit. But in Bangladesh, for example, croplands are only 1 or 2 metres above sea level. They're already starting to suffer from the influx of water in storms and so on. So 250, 250 million people live only 1 or 2 metres above sea level. So what do we think is going to happen? That's 10 times the Australian population. What do we think is going to happen to those people when the sea level goes up? Are they going to want to go somewhere else? Might they look at that country down the bottom, down south, and say, hey, we could go down there? Are we going to have a few little problems about immigration? Well, this is the sort of issue that we've got to start thinking about. And of course, the obvious problem is that as it gets hotter, the average temperature goes up, we get more hot days, and of course we get hotter extreme days. And this is the sort of thing that's causing the Amazon to die back. It's causing the sort of fires we had, what was it, 3 years ago now, or thereabouts, that create their own, see the twist on that smoke. It's creating its own sort of, what do you call it, sort of chimney that expands the fires. The heat killed lots and lots of cattle. The floods did as well. As warm water evaporates, the air condenses, and of course we get more moisture into the air. And of course, the more moisture you have in the air, the stronger the storms, the stronger the hurricanes. At the same time, it's not that we just get everything gets hotter. In fact, in North America, you know, there's a famous picture of some idiot politician in America holding up a snowball saying, you know, where's global warming gone? Well, the funny thing about global warming is that it sends Arctic weather further south. So you get hotter, warmer weather, and you also get colder weather, abnormal cold weather. And so basically the weather just gets stronger, or the storms get worse, and you get greater extremes. Now I'm going to have to skip a little bit here too, but the science points out that there are a whole lot of tipping points. You know, once they start going, you can't stop them. And I'm not going to show you that slide too much. And the carbon budget, how much more carbon can we emit? Well, there are varying estimates on this. The basic guess is that we can emit something like another 400 gigatons, but that means in terms of what's going on, had we started cutting things down in 2016, we could have gone down that nice blue curve. If we'd started in 2020, the yellow curve. If we start next year and we're pushing it to start next year, the longer we leave it, in other words, the steeper that curve has got to be. In other words, the more drastic the measures we've got to take. But we have been emitting, this is Australia, emitting carbon dioxide at a rate of 4 times our fair share. In other words, the average person around the world is emitting 1/4 of as much CO2 as we are. So we're doing 4 times our fair share. And we have the wealth and the technology to do a whole lot better. I mean, poor countries are pushing it. They don't emit as much, but they don't have the technology to deal with it very well. We do, but we're not using it. We have the best solar and wind resources in the world, and so we should be leading the way, not being dragged along, kicking and screaming, which is pretty much what we're doing. As David Attenborough says, this isn't about saving our planet, it's about saving ourselves. What can we do about it? Well, that's what we'll get to next. But has anyone else got questions? No? Okay, well, I'll keep going. What can we do about it? Well, the first thing, of course, we can do is become aware.
Excuse me, can I interrupt for a second? I've got one little comment I'd like to make. One of the things that always bothers me about presentations on climate change is it never seems to mention the serious disruption to rainfall patterns, which is going to seriously threaten our food supply, not just ours in our continent, but in every continent. Many of the food bowls are drying out or getting too wet and be covered with floods. We need extreme stability to be able to feed 8,000 million people, and we haven't got it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Had I had a bit more time, when I was talking about Bangladesh, I pointed out that a lot of our food comes from that part of the world, and a lot of their food comes from that part of the world, and that's being threatened. And of course, the same things in Australia. Our own crops and so on are failing here and there. So what can we do about it? Well, first thing, I think, become aware, and it's not only my website, of course, there are lots of places where you can become aware of it. For example, you can read Joel Gergis's book, and there are a whole lot of others. There's Ross Garnaut. He's more on about what we can do about it. But I would say, Ross Garnaut is a very good place to start. Along with Joel Gergis and the quarterly essay and so on. And we need to talk with other people. I was talking about a little current affairs group. Somebody said, when I try to say anything about climate change to my friends, they say, oh, we've done all that. They don't want to talk about it. But the problem is that unless we do spread the word, nothing's going to happen, because, of course, the other thing we need to do is vote for the right politicians. We need to, and we also need to email them. We're also talking in our group today about what we can do, and people were saying, yes, we can grow our own veggies, and we can turn down the thermostat, and we can buy an electric car and so on. But of course, those things are good, but they're not going to solve the problem. What we need is for the government to actually take the right sort of action. And the government is not going to take the right action unless they fear that they're going to be kicked out if they don't. And at the moment, of course, it's a bit the other way around. I'm really worried about the fact that Albanese is less popular than Dutton. How does that happen? We need to actually go and talk with our politicians and convince them that they have to not only do the right thing, but they have to get up and say why we need to do this. You don't actually hear very much from them about why we need to take action. Now, okay, it's we're 40 minutes into this, so I want to give time for people to add their own thoughts, but I'll just pop in a couple more things. Clearly, powerful interests don't want us to change, and it's the big oil companies, BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Shell. They all say they're going to do things, but in fact, what actually happens is, well, basically nothing, very much at all. And of course, we've got our own versions of that. Clive Palmer, Gina Reinhold. BP says a lot of nice things about what we need to do, but on the other hand, they're still producing huge amounts of coal and so forth. The other thing I mentioned earlier was that I worry about what's going on in schools. You may have seen this article in The Age the other day. Lots of teachers are clearing out because they just are finding it too difficult. That is a symptom of a deeper problem, I think. Schools just are not being funded properly. Teachers are being expected to way too much. And of course, the idea of actually dealing with this problem of climate change is just too much for them. A third of kids, you probably saw this the other day in The Age too, a third of kids basically they're struggling with literacy and numeracy. A third of them. That's terrible. My particular subject of physics, you would hope, might be dealing with the issue of climate change. Well, it has a little bit. In the area of study 2, which is the second half of year 11, there are a number of options, and people can choose one of contemporary issues and applications. So they choose one option out of 18, and one of them is about climate change. And that's about it for the whole physics curriculum. So perhaps 1/18 of the students doing physics, which you would hope might be dealing with the issue somewhat, can do a topic called How Does Physics Explain Climate Change? You'll notice it doesn't say, what can physics do about solving the problem? It's just, what can it do to explain it? So kids are not getting, a couple of some other subjects are doing little bits of it too, but basically kids are getting very little real education about climate change in schools. There are, of course, isolated examples of teachers who are concerned and are sort of going beyond the curriculums, but on the whole, many kids are coming out with very little understanding of what climate change is really all about. And I've been speaking to some of those 13 grandchildren of ours that, they're pretty unaware of what's going on in this area. Of course, there's the SS4C, the student strikes for climate. But this is their website as of yesterday. The next global climate strike is last April. Yes, there was a bit of a strike then, but was there any mention of it in The Age? No, nothing in The Age. And of course, nothing in the Murdoch media at all. I think most of you will probably remember when we went on marches to protest against the Vietnam War and things like that. These kids are facing basically a more drastic future, and yet they don't seem to be too worried about it. And you know, there are certainly isolated. There are examples of kids who are, but on the whole, at the school I taught at a couple of years ago, I was amazed at how little the kids were concerned about climate change. So what's it going to take? This is as the conversation says, this is an intergenerational crime against humanity. What's it going to take for political leaders to start taking climate change seriously? And this is Joel Gergis again, this time in the conversation. The world's got Buckley's chance of achieving the 1.5 target, as you probably saw before. Even 2 degrees is going to be a stretch. So when are we going to actually start, you know, taking action? There are young climate activists are out there somewhere, but this particular article in the conversation talks about the fact that a lot of adults support their voice, but we're not hearing a lot of it, are we? And of course, then there's the politicians. They're being bribed to not act. The fossil fuel give them lots of money, and other big companies giving them lots of money. Is our political system up to it? It's a bit of a question.
We're not going to send the economy into free fall and families bankrupt through an ideologically based approach.
Ideological? Who's being ideological about this? I would have thought it was a very practical approach, not ideological. Clearly it's Dutton who's being ideological here. Acting on climate doesn't fit with his ideology. How else could you put it?
The Labor Party can try and please people in Paris. My job is to take care of the Australian people.
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
And there we have these our so-called political leaders talking as though somehow or other this has all got to do with Paris, the city. Paris has got nothing to do with it. It was just where the conferences took place. And so for them to say they were, you know, they're looking after Australians, not Parisians, it's just totally ridiculous. It's totally wrong. I said earlier that I'm rather concerned about the fact that Australians seem to be becoming less concerned about it. This survey that was done a little while back, right around the world, had Australia right down the bottom of people who think climate disruption is of anthropogenic origin. We're way below the global average. Okay, more than half Australians do, something like 60%, but you know, the world average is 70-something%. China is up there over 80%. So what's going wrong? Why are we so far down the list? And in fact, another question that was asked was about the cost of climate impacts and the cost of acting. And we were right down the bottom of that one. We Australians reckoned that it was going to be cheaper to just allow climate change to happen than to actually take action. Now, of course, that's crazy. As we already know, wind and solar energy are cheaper than new fossil energy. They mightn't be cheaper than using the current power stations, but if you're going to build some sort of new energy system in Australia, wind and solar are cheaper. And they're certainly cheaper than nuclear, of course. So what's the problem? And I'm going to suggest that a large amount of the problem is that a lot of the media is not telling us the truth. And in fact, some of the media is telling us lies. We need better journalism. Going to skip a couple of things here, but we've got people like Bolt. Now, I'm sure you don't watch him, but listen to this rubbish. Oh, he's not going to talk to us.
People like that, Gregory Andrews, are convinced the world is doomed by global warming, their children are doomed. I mean, fancy telling your children that when your chances of dying from a climate-related disaster have never been lower. Never been lower. People like that are so convinced the world is doomed by global warming, largely because of the irresponsible media reporting we get of climate scares. And I'm going to give you another example. And again today on the ABC.
A new report says the world's oceans are being transformed by climate change, with more underwater heat waves putting pressure on marine life, including the Great Barrier Reef.
Joining me is reef expert and marine physicist, Dr. Peter Ridd.
Be the climate change thing, but of course we've got record high coral in the last 2 years, despite these supposedly devastating 4 hot water bleaching events.
Now, this is typical of the rubbish that Bolt, and I have to say that Bolt is one of the most listened to commentators. I know that's horrible to actually hear, but he has very high ratings. And that particular segment was typical of the sort of thing he says. You're not going to die of climate change. No, not at the moment. What we're talking about with climate change is what's going to happen in the next decades, not what's happening right at the moment. He's probably right about the fact that you've got less chance of dying of climate at the moment than you did have a while back when we weren't aware, and we've got a lot, more developed ways of dealing with it. But then to quote this guy, Peter Ridd, he was fired from James Cook University in 2018 because he was going to the press and saying things that were totally inappropriate and quite against the research that most of his colleagues were doing. He's part of this thing called the Global Warming Policy Foundation. You've probably never heard of it, but it's a sort of anti-climate change foundation. You probably have heard of the Institute of Public Affairs, funded by people like Gina Reinhardt and known for opposing actions on climate. So Bolt will go to that guy who's got no credibility in this field and totally ignore people like these, Terry Hughes and Morgan, the people who actually work in the field of studying the effect of climate on coral reefs and so on. Is this global warming? Why on earth are we trying to stop it? Well, there are very good reasons, but he tries to pretend that there aren't. And the Australian is terrible on this. You've got all sorts of commentators, Bourne Longboard, Chris Kenny, Judith Sloan, Nick Catter. There's article after article in the Australian throwing doubt on climate action or the need for climate action. In fact, they published ridiculous ads like this, which is quite crazy stuff. One last thing. The most visited newspaper websites in Australia. YouTube, the top of it, over 900 million visits. News.com, Murdoch Media, next on the list, but 128 million. Then Wikipedia, Instagram, and then we get the ABC, followed by Twitter and the Sydney Morning Herald, and there's a Guardian. That's good to see that there. But where is probably the best source of news on climate? The Conversation doesn't get a mention on that list at all. And yet, in my book, if you want to go to reliable information on virtually any subject, really, The Conversation's the place to go. But, oh no, that doesn't even get a mention, doesn't get rated on that site of where people are getting their news.
Let's swing over to questions. I know we've got some people on the call who've got some very interesting perspectives about this issue. So I'm very keen to hear from them. Bronwyn, you're top of my list. Would you like to unmute and we'll get the discussion rolling?
Thank you. And thanks, Keith. Can I might just mention at the beginning that I wanted to ask you about the Atlas network and what you know about it. But my more pertinent question about and from your presentation was you had a slide about the carbon budget. And I didn't take down the actual numbers of that budget, but noticing that if we did start at the beginning of next year, we'd have a very steep slope. What is the probability of safety of, I don't know how you would describe that, but maybe of not reaching or not going over 2 degrees with that sort of action if we actually did get ourselves together and start reducing emissions as fast as we can next year?
Well, unfortunately, I think the answer to that one is that there's most scientists that I've read about are saying that we've got virtually no chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and a very small chance of staying below 2 degrees. Perhaps the best we can hope for is that we'll go over 2 degrees, but then by then we'll get our act together and get emissions right down, and get the temperature to come down again. But the problem is, as I've mentioned a few times there, we've got these sort of feedback loops that mean that even if we stopped emitting carbon dioxide now, some of those things are going to continue to heat up the earth, like the lower amount of ice on the water means that the water is absorbing more heat from the sun. And as you saw, the temperature graph of the sea is continuing to go up.
So we should be saying, as activists, we should be saying there is no carbon budget left. Would you agree?
I think you could pretty much say that, yes. And in fact, I don't know whether I can get back to the appropriate picture, but
With the Labor Party.
oh, sorry, no, I can't find it easily. But that slide that had the increasing slopes, the longer we leave it, clearly that should be a warning sign. We've left it too late. A number of scientists would say that we've got virtually no chance of keeping it under control. Of course, the other thing is the possibility of putting something in the atmosphere that will reflect sunlight. That's pretty scary. It could have a lot of effects other than reflecting the sunlight. But perhaps we'll have to go that way.
You're referring to Sir David King's
yes, yeah,
work. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that.
Okay, thank you. Anne, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Keith, for that presentation. Can I maybe just make 3 little comments and then a question? The first was your question about why Australians seem to be becoming less concerned about climate change. My thought, I'd like your reactions to, is that I think Albo and Bowen and the others have been very clever about having lots of rhetoric about the energy electrification and the renewable energy, but they barely ever say the word climate change. And so I think for a lot of people, they feel we're doing our bit. We're on this transition to renewable energy. We don't need to worry about anything else. So your views about that would be interesting. Then when you're talking about Australians per capita share of emissions and us being 4 times above our rate, that's ignoring our scope 3 emissions, which is from all of our exports. So 2 reports came out just a few days ago from Climate Analytics and the Human Rights Institute of Uni of New South Wales, showing that if you count the emissions from all the coal and oil and gas that we export, we're second only to Russia in our emissions. So, that seems to me another part that we really need to be emphasising with people. And then the third thing was about why aren't we doing more? And it seems to me for a lot of people, it is that they feel like it's too late. Like, it's just so dire. With the horse has bolted. We can't do anything about it. What can one person do? And when you said, what can we do? You talked about voting and about visiting or emailing our MPs. Seems to me there's a lot more that we can do as individuals. We can visit our MPs. We can join together with others. And there are so many activist groups like XR and all the local groups like our Darebin Climate Action Now, which not only can do more because more people are doing it together, but also give you a little bit of sort of hope and faith that together we can make a change. And so many groups that are doing fantastic work. And we can write submissions to all the inquiries, like, there's the current work on the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act and the attempts to get a climate trigger into the revisions of that act. That's, something where we can make our voices heard to say this is something we think ought to happen. We can divest our money and tell our banks or whoever we're divesting from why we're doing it, and that we expect them to up their game and to stop having their money in fossil fuels. So I just wonder what you think about all those sort of forms of citizen activism or civic responsibility, citizenship stuff.
I think that's all great stuff, Anne. Maybe if I'd had more time, I'd have included some of that too. The problem of, as you said, the politicians are talking about more renewable energy and all that, but they rarely mention climate change. I fear that a lot of people have sort of got climate change fatigue. They have heard too much about it. They don't want to know about it anymore. And that's a real worry, because it is slowing the whole process down. It's the emphasis on, we've got to get more renewable energy, it'll be cheaper eventually, is good. But the reason we've got to get more renewable energy is to get rid of fossil energy. What else? I think joining other groups, of course, is a great thing to do. I would advocate people join local people joining DCAN. I must admit I've been a bit of a not a very good member of that, but I should get back to it. Yeah. I do worry a little bit about XR, Extinction Rebellion and so on. I am a bit concerned that a lot of the actions that those people take are putting people off. I don't know. I guess they feel they've got to do something, and getting out there and stopping the traffic or whatever it is they do is making a point. But I just wonder whether that's an effective way of getting the message out. Anyway, that's just my worry about that. Yeah, well, basically, I agree with all those other things you said. We should be not just emailing, but going and seeing them. I had an hour with Jed Kearney recently, and yeah, I have to feel that she accepted a lot of what I was saying. She also pointed out that acting on it is harder than we might think. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, I'm very mindful of time, so I'd like to cut through to another couple of questions. John's got his hand up, and Leslie, are you also wanting to ask a question? Yes.
Yes, say something. Yes.
Yes. Before we do that, one thing that occurs to me is, should we lower the voting age? In Wales, they've lowered the voting age to 16, and I'm not sure that they're the only country that's done that. But I mean, it's the next generation and those following who are going to bear the brunt of this, well and truly. Even if we get the emissions down, the existing levels of carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide and methane particularly are going to stay around in the atmosphere for a long time. So just a lateral thought, should we be thinking about this kind of thing? You know, another aspect. So John, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, thanks for the talk, Keith. That was great, enlightening, and yeah, it brings me up to date. I was wondering, I think the momentum in this country is such that it would take a lot of changing people's minds. And you also mentioned how bad the education was for students now in regards to understanding what climate change is and what we can do. This is kids that are coming on now. What can we do to, and this might sound selfish, but there's a few of us here. What can we do for our own survival? Because like as we go on, things are going to become more difficult, and living conditions will probably get worse. I just wonder what suggestions you might have. Thanks.
Well, in my view, we probably aren't going to see the worst of it. We're certainly not going to see the worst of it. But, well, as far as I'm concerned, my main efforts are to sort of talk to politicians, to talk to groups like this, try to spread the word that we have to take action. That's what I feel I have to do. And I think Jenny's point about the voting age is a great one. I reckon most 16 to 18-year-olds are just as sensible or more sensible than many over 60s. And as Jenny said, they're the ones who are going to be facing the worst of this problem. So they certainly should have the vote. I'd be all in favour of that. I also noticed that Bronwyn and Anne have defended XR somewhat on the chat, and yeah, that's great. I know there are a lot of good things that happen in those groups, as well as the sitting on the roads. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Leslie, where are you? Yes, would you like to?
Well, I should confess that I am in Extinction Rebellion, and but I won't defend it except by quoting other people. In Professor Stephen Humphreys from the London School of Economics, and he sort of explains a little bit one of the reasons why he thinks that we're not as engaged as we should be is because he says that largely the Anglosphere, so Canada, the US, us, all of us West, English speakers, are pretty confident that we'll be okay, that other people are going to suffer, but somehow our affluence and our intelligence will basically be okay. Other people will be much worse off than we are. And when in the presentation where he was making this announcement, he was asked, so what do you propose we do? And his response was civil disobedience. That was his answer, civil disobedience. The time frame that we have left, the only thing that is going to work is civil disobedience. And George Monbiot has also sort of justified this thing. There was a thing in The Guardian in the last couple of days pointing out that Roger Hallam, who started Extinction Rebellion, has just been locked up for 5 years or sentenced to 5 years. 4 other activists, one of whom actually didn't do anything except attend a Zoom or maybe organise the Zoom, but his crime was Zooming, planning on blocking a freeway. They've been sentenced, all of those have been sentenced to 4 years in jail. And as Monbiot pointed out, the racist rioters recently, that they're likely to get months as a maximum. Farmers come into town and block traffic, they get nothing. And the reason why that climate protesters are locked up for such extensive periods is that the legislation is being written by lobby groups funded by these same lobby groups funded by fossil fuel industries. They write the legislation. The only people they care about stopping are the people who do civil disobedience because it works. They've actually got the law changed to the point that if you try to explain to the court in the UK why you are taking action, that is treated as contempt of court and you can be locked up. You're not allowed to explain why you, as an educated, concerned citizen, are taking action to stop the climate change. It's illegal. And that's because the fossil fuels don't want us talking. But they don't want us talking because we work. Extinction Rebellion is getting results.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? The issue about protest and human rights and freedom of expression and so on. It's too big an issue to sort of start exploring this evening, but it's one that I would like to continue talking about. On the other side of the law and order and justice issue is the question of the role of the courts. I mean, there was that important case that Anjali Sharma took to the courts and, after a long period of time about whether or not there was a duty of care, she and other young people were owed a duty of care by the government. So, I mean, there are other ways of taking action and, it might, for the people who are time poor, chipping in a few dollars for legal defence. I'm always on the lookout for what Environment Justice Group are doing to see if there's something that we might, as humanists, get in and support them with. I mean, there's only so much you can do at a local level, and it is very soul-destroying at times. So there is safety in numbers in terms of the climate anxiety and the climate burnout in terms of being involved with other groups. Okay, I'm very conscious of time. We've had a wonderful talk from Keith this evening, but is there anyone who's got a burning issue that they are sitting on and would like to just raise in the last few minutes?
Could I just mention that the Anglosphere does seem to be a problem. The common factor in the Anglosphere is the Murdoch media. And I think many of us who never look at that stuff are not really aware of how dangerous it is. And I'd just like to, if everybody could just spread the word that the Murdoch media is just, it's not media, it's propaganda. And it's very bad propaganda. Yes.
And on that note, I mean, you did talk about writing letters. I mean, I think it's one thing to be writing a letter to the age, say, who are kind of broader in this sphere, but to really take the game up to the Murdoch media is another challenge, again, of another order. And I think that that is well worth considering. I belong to a letter writing group, And so I don't have to buy the Murdoch papers. I get fed each day with what's making news on the climate front from the Australian and the Herald Sun. And I'd have to say it makes your hair stand on end. And so my letter writing group have had considerable success, and they keep an honour board. If you happen to write back about an Andrew Bolt article or a Peter Credlin article, and I'd have to say, had a Peter Credlin myself on one occasion, but I don't get around to writing often enough. But does it make a difference? I don't know, but it helps to some extent. You feel as if you're doing something. So anyhow, I'd like to thank everybody who's joined the discussion tonight. And in particular, I'd like to thank Keith. I thought that his data and some of those pictures were very helpful in terms of cutting through some of the detail and the complexity of the issue. A picture's worth 1,000 words, they say. And I do think it helps from time to time to see it visually as well as hear about it. So on that note, we'll close the evening, and I'd like you all to join with me and just thank Keith, either in the traditional sense or using the Zoom hand. Many thanks, Keith.